Thank you, Mr Hall. Okay, we'll declare the agenda briefing session open at 4 p.m. and welcome everyone here today. Agenda briefing sessions are used to inform councillors on the items of business to be presented and discussed at the forthcoming Ordinary Council meeting. These meetings are open to members of the public who may request to present a deputation to Council relating to an item on the agenda. No decisions are made at these meetings, although councillors can request additional information or alternative wording be provided to allow for motions to be prepared for consideration at the forthcoming Ordinary Council meeting. Any statement regarding any planning or development application made during an agenda briefing session is not to be taken as notice of approval. Anyone who has an application lodged with the Shire must obtain and should only rely on written confirmation of the outcome of the application and any conditions attached to the decision made by Council. An audio and visual record will be made by means of live streaming of these proceedings and uploaded to the Shire's YouTube page for viewing. Acknowledgement of country. The Shire of Harvey acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land and their continuing connection to the land, waters and community. And we pay our respects to all members of the Aboriginal communities and to their cultures and to elders both past and present. If I can just remind Councillor Beach, who is zooming in today, to wish to ask questions, just to raise your hand on the screen.
And Councillor Boylan.
And Councillor Boylan and Councillor Burgoyne. No?
But we're having trouble with them connecting.
Okay, right. Rightio. Okay, item 2, record of apologies and leave of absence.
Councillor Jackson.
Councillor Jackson is an apology. Okay, item 3, declaration of members and officers' personal interest. As per screen. Is there any others? Councillor Bromham.
Yeah, Mr President, I wasn't sure whether I should declare an interest in 523 Richardson Road, being a member of the Bunbury Harvey Regional Council or not. Do I have an interest in that? Not really, I suppose. No? Okay.
Okay, is there none others? Okay, item 4, deputations. We'll go to Mr Jonathan Riley with item 5.3.1. Fuel recharge and convenience stop, DAP application lot 335, number 38, Stanley Road, Wellesley. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, councillors. My name's actually Mike Fitzgerald. Jonathan and I are the proponents of this application. Sorry about that. The application seeks JDAP approval to a fuel, EV recharge facility and convenience store, as well as associated rest areas for dogs and people. I suspect most of you will know Stanley Road. It's a cul-de-sac entry road to the regional tip. It is directly over the highway from Australand and is industrial in nature. As you know, the Bunbury Outer Bypass is under construction, and after this road opens, many southbound travellers will elect to bypass Bunbury. If they make that election, they will also miss the existing fuel stations in Bunbury. The site at Stanley Road potentially gives the travelling public an opportunity to fuel, rest and safely download emails and make phone calls. As part of our research into the project, we were fascinated to learn that despite Albany Highway having only a quarter of the traffic carried by Forest Highway, it is served by 3 times as many safe fuel and rest stops. Our project is predicated on availing the travelling public of another convenient opportunity to stop and refuel on their way south, and it has been designed to be kid-friendly, dog-friendly, so that all travellers can stretch their legs safely. The inclusion of an EV charging facility, which will be the only one on the primary road between Perth and Augusta, is also somewhat of a coup for the area. Interstate and overseas tourists particularly, whom are increasingly interested in self-drive opportunities pre-COVID, should be afforded more than just the 2 left-in, left-out opportunities to rest and refuel on the state's busiest tourist route. In addition to the functioning described above, the location of Stanley Road at the gateway to the southwest provides an obvious opportunity to create a dedicated tourism facility. Showcasing the diversity of tourism experiences in the Shire of Harvey, and particularly Australand, it is envisaged that picnic tables and plaques in amongst native planting will be used as functional maps of the area's tourism opportunities. We will be encouraging travellers to stretch their legs, consume refreshments in the grassed informal setting that is framed by notice boards and tables, all bearing reference to fruit picking opportunities, the Leschenault Inlet and the spectacular peninsula, amongst other things. We would be very open to working with your staff and local operators to make the most of this opportunity and audience. Thank you very much for your time.
Any questions, councillors?
Yeah, do you see this facility being just for small vehicles moving south, or do you see trucks and other vehicles such as those utilising the facility as well?
No, just, sorry, through you, sir. Just cars, so no trucks.
With the current Catalanos being in there, with the intersection, do you reckon that's going to cause too much, like backing or anything like that with the trucks coming in and out? Or are you looking at revising kind of that intersection altogether to allow them their flow of their depot there?
Through you, we've had a lot of liaison with Main Roads, and the other proponent is a traffic engineer with a lot of experience. So we're working through all of that detail at present. But the site already has a deceleration lane. There's fantastic visibility to Stanley Road, and indeed we took more than a year to settle on this site as being the best, safest means by which you could stop. And it's only there to attract left in, left out. So we're not looking at any traffic going northbound. It's merely another opportunity to safely stop or southbound.
Councillor Dickinson.
I have a couple of questions. Reading what we've been presented with, it said in there that water was close proximity, and it stated the distance of the Brunswick River and a conservation category wetland. I was just wondering, and then it didn't mention any more, and it said that it was fine. So I'm just a little bit confused about the distance that's required between, whether there's a safe distance with water table and things like that.
Shall I address it? Through you, sir. The site is actually a very long way away from the river, and the relief is such that the water, any runoff, for instance, would have to go uphill and then downhill, which it's not going to do. So the two catchments are separate, and it's at least 600, 700 metres away. So it's actually a long distance from the river in that receiving environment.
Councillor Crispin.
The Donnybrook has like a charging station. Is that so for recharging electrical cars, they're all the same type of plug-in and go? So technically, it would be like come to Perth, you could recharge there, and if you're heading south, you'd technically stop in Donnybrook. Is that kind of?
Through you, so the websites that you can avail yourself of this information are still resetting and repaginating, giving people that information, and as this becomes more prevalent, I'm sure the network will be extended. But the research that we can do thus far, for instance, the ones at just south of Perth, none of them have EV charging stations as yet, and I know the RAC have been given money by the federal government to improve the network, but that's still in its infancy. So this will be one of the first ones on that route, and with cars, they've got reasonable range at the moment. That will probably get better with batteries becoming more efficient, but for now we believe that this one is a handy piece of kit to have halfway between Perth and the southwest.
Councillor Cavoni.
The only question I have, and it's to the staff, is this lot, when I was at Cavoni Brothers, we had the extraction licence on it then. And at the end of the extraction licence, we were in dispute with the landowner because he wanted it as a truck parking bay and he wouldn't let us rehabilitate it. So to my understanding, when I left Caboni Brothers in 2017, there was still a rehabilitation bond on that block that Caboni Brothers, or the Shire, still holds on behalf of Caboni Brothers. So I don't know whether you just want to check that out.
No, I suppose we'd
Chair, yeah, we'll have
take
to
it
check
on
that out.
notice.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Thank you very much for your time.
So moving on to Ms Rachel Romano for item 5.3.2, proposed vegetation clearing and horticulture in Mila.
Thank you, Mr. President, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. I would also like to acknowledge traditional owners past, present and future. I'm not very good at this. However, I would like to address the Patani Farms application to develop Lot 6 and 8 of Rig Road Mile Up as a vegetable production site, and particularly the amendments put forward for the meeting. But first and foremost, the conservation of flora and fauna are of the highest priority in my objections, even with the proposed retention of established trees on Lot 6. Lot 8 is a valuable and beautiful example of the potential cooperative conservation of habitat and farming practices. On page 158 of the original application, it says, quote, both lots are designated by the Shire as quote, places of landscape value, end quote. And I would like to comment that intense horticulture cannot compete with established trees and native habitat for aesthetics. But on to more important things. The amended application, page 210, quote, the EPA's recommended default separation distance for this proposal could be 300 metres, full stop. A 300-metre buffer would consist of an area greater than 50% of the proposed areas, end quote. My comment would be that the amended application obfuscates the no spray zone requirements and Patani Farms' intentions. Harvey Council's 15th member advised that the amended proposal could be approved if the recommendations of the Department of Health using EPA default 300-metre no spray zone is adopted. It isn't stated as such, but that is how it actually reads within the amended application. Despite this amended application acknowledges the 300, despite this, it acknowledges the 300 metre zone, but still proposes 40 to 50 metre zones to be applied. The proposed zones are to be to the nearest residents, I might add, not their boundaries, thereby limiting the safe use of affected adjacent private property. Point 5, Patani Farms state that the 300-metre no-spray zone makes this plan unfeasible, so I would suggest that it is just that, unfeasible and should be rejected. Point 6, misinformation has been circulated by Ms Patani at information sessions that the remaining trees will only survive 20 years, which was stated at session 1 of the public meeting, and 10 years at session 2 of the public meeting. And I have video recordings of this. This is based on uninformed and unqualified observations. My son, Gabriel Romano, is a highly qualified horticulturalist and arborist, and my daughter, Freya Romano, is a practicing environmental scientist who report this is definitely not the case. These spurious comments were designed to somehow make the destruction of the trees less catastrophic for the fauna. Point 7, I'm jumping around. Information sessions given by Ms Patani contained veiled threats to challenge the rights of lakeside landowners and their application for permanent residency if they continued to object. Also suggested by Ms Patani, nearby residents should accept that they bought properties in a farming area. Yes, I agree, but not intensive monocultural style horticulture. Given that the Botany business acquired Lot 6 and Lot 8 several years after Lakeside was established and zoned special residential, this only strengthens my resolve not to be bullied or threatened. Point 8. My concerns about the buffers are complex and numerous. I don't really feel that we should be going into the buffers because I don't think that the proposal should go ahead. However, a lot of the information is based around how to facilitate the buffers. Okay, first, as has been pointed out by other people, the time required to grow a suitable height and density has been suggested as 10 years. Number 2, fire hazard leading along unbroken boundaries, especially if using native species. If you have non-native species, which are fire retardant, this is not good for habitat or wildlife, so it's a catch-22. You can't have it both ways. Buffers need to be at least 4 metres high to stop the sand and topsoil drift in prevailing winds. I have video recordings. I just happened to be driving along Rig Road and I saw videoed on my phone dust coming over 4 metres high across Rig Road onto Lot 6 and Lot 8 from adjacent farms. If this was to be bulldozed, if we were to lose the existing trees, we would have a horrific wind tunnel of dust and sand coming into the whole area. And also, it suggested that the fallow land could be watered and that putting in sprays in order to stop the dust and sand from doing that. I just can't see how you can keep fallow land constantly, continually damp and to stop the soil and wind erosion. And not only that, this is an absolute waste of precious water resources that would be ineffective because it cannot be done all the time. Thank you for listening to my objections or deputation. Do you have any questions?
Any questions, councillors?
Oh, sorry.
All good. No, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, another deputation from Deb Miller with regards to item 5.3.2 as well. Welcome, Deb.
Thank you. I'm an owner at Freshwater Lakes Estate, and I also had a few comments to make. One of them being that ploughing is one of the biggest contributors to carbon emissions, which obviously they will be doing that when they get rid of all the trees. And we need mature trees to absorb carbon. As Rachel mentioned, we were established as a residential area prior to Botany purchasing the land that they now want to vegetate. And despite assurances about what's going to happen with the wind, with fertilisers, pesticides, etc., what's going to happen when this, it's going to happen over 4 metres high and blow into our water tanks, which we rely on for our drinking and house water. And just one last thing, how much land is enough? Any questions?
Any questions at all? Thanks, Deb.
No.
Okay, welcome Canella Hope with item 5.3.3, proposed standard scheme amendment number 129, additional use number 19, Harvey Springs Estate Tourism Precinct. Welcome, Canella.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to present. I'm here representing the owner of the Harvey Springs Estate in Cookinup, Tony Barton. I've only got a short presentation to make and then happy to answer any questions. I have been here before on this matter, but I appreciate there may have been a change with some councillors since we were here pretty much 12 months ago. Unfortunately, my client Tony couldn't come along himself today. However, he wanted me to express his continued enthusiasm in the venture for the Harvey Springs Estate, and also to particularly acknowledge the Shire's adoption in December of the Economic Development Strategy. This strategy, in hand with the Region Tourism Roadmap implementation plan and the establishment of the Destination Harvey Business Unit, they're all exciting advancements for the Shire, clearly demonstrating the Shire's commitment to tourism and economic development. Likewise is the new planning scheme that I understand will be shortly out for public comment. These are particularly relevant for the Harvey Springs project, which has the potential to fulfil many of the aspirations within those documents. This includes major agritourism opportunity, market-leading food and beverage experiences, all in a destination less than 2 hours from Perth. There's potential for boutique accommodation and also for large-scale events. The options are really broad and it's really exciting, and that's what this proposed scheme amendment sets out to do, to establish the statutory framework to start achieving those visions. As many of you might recall, Tony and I were here 12 months ago and we presented with Pacifica. Pacifica are a privately owned property development company that were considering at that time investing in Harvey Springs. Pacifica have a hospitality portfolio, and this includes the Hilton developments in Albany, Busselton, Karratha and Kalgoorlie. Unfortunately though, Pacifica's interest has shifted elsewhere at the moment, and one of the reasons for that was the uncertainty in the planning scheme. It just wasn't ready to fully support, I suppose, and endorse their ideas at that time. So this scheme amendment is seeking to circumvent that. It's seeking to provide that certainty for investors like Pacifica or someone else that might be interested in Harvey Springs. In conclusion, I wanted to acknowledge the officers' recommendation to initiate the scheme amendment, and I wanted to thank the officers for their ongoing assistance as we've developed this up. It aims to set a framework with varying levels of obligation potentially on investors as the development advances. Working together like this has helped to facilitate confidence for Tony and for potential investors, and we're looking forward to the project going out to the community for their comment as well. So yes, thank you.
Thanks, Canella. Is there any questions, councillors?
Nope. Thank you very much.
Okay, go to item 5, reports. So we'll just check in with Councillor Beach. Are you still able to hear us okay, Councillor?
Yes, thanks.
And do you have any declarations of interest at all?
No, I don't.
All clear? Okay, thank you. Councillor Boylan, can you hear us okay, and do you have any interest to declare in the meeting? No. Okay, all good, thank you. Okay, item 5, reports. 5.1.1, tender T012022, consulting services. We have questions from Councillor Lovett.
Apologies, does that relate through to the notice of motion?
Yep.
And Councillor Campbell, do your questions relate to this item or
No,
the notice of motion?
This item, thank you.
Councillor Campbell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to confirm that has council actually agreed to what is actually being built in the Harvey precinct? Because I'm of the understanding that we received draft plans from the consultant, then there was the community consultation, and then those comments were taken back, were given to the consultant, and I thought that they were coming back to council with a change. I might have missed the memo, but I don't think I've seen that. And my second question is, once this contract is awarded, what's the anticipated timeline for the phase of this project?
Yes, so the consultant, Christo Architects, is actually has been engaged to continue and sort out the master plan and go through the brief again. Just because there's been so many changes in the last year and a half. And that the first meeting with the reference group will be kicking off, we hope, next week, if we can get everybody on board. At this stage, it looks like it's early next week. With the tender, the tenderers were all told of the time that there would be a small wait, and that is 1 to 2 months to get everything sorted out, and that's making sure that once that's all sorted out, it comes to council and that'll get endorsed before moving on to the main design, development of design and documentation.
So just to confirm, those changes that the consultant is currently working with won't come to council, they're going to go straight to the reference group to work with?
Yes, so there's a lot of input needed from the reference group as well before he can finalise. So they aren't changes ready at this stage.
Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Beach. Just need to unmute Councillor Beach.
How's that? Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear. Away you go.
Yeah. I just wanted to know whether the original design architect was met with the reference group yet, and perhaps recommended any changes to his original design given the feedback from the community.
Through the President, yes, Councillor Beach, he's working on the brief at the moment and he's about to meet with the reference group next week.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any more questions on item 5.1.1? Okay, item 5.2.1, bridge number 4930 Collie River Road. Question from Councillor Capagreco.
Thank you, Mr. President. I did email a couple of questions through and I've had a response, but just for the wider group, one of the questions that I had was there was a meeting from Shire of Dardanup in October 2017 where at that meeting they pledged some money. I was wondering if that money actually was provided to Harvey Shire. And the second question that I had was the props that we've got under that bridge currently, are we still hiring those props? Because it was quite an expensive cost to hire. And have we looked at the option of purchasing similar equipment so we don't pay an annual rent? Mr. Lotsnicker did reply to my questions and I'm quite happy with the answers, although the first question I haven't got a reply for that one, whether we did get the money that was pledged by Shire of Dardanup.
Yeah, look, through the chair, yes, they have always funded their part until the late, and they have funded the last request too, and hence their resolution that they wouldn't fund any more, and hence this report saying we don't agree with that, and we need to work out a better way to resolve this.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions, councillors? Okay. Item 5.2.2, Galway Green bore pump replacement. Councillor Campbell.
Thanks, Mr. President. And I've got a response from Mr. Lotsnicker, but my question was, is the pump insured? And if so, is this an option to cover the costs? And if it's not insured, why not?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. Through the Chair. Look, I did discuss that with our governance people today. They checked with the LGIS, and unfortunately that particular pump and bore is not insured. And why not? Basically, I'm just following that up to find out why it's not insured. We've got a huge spreadsheet of everything that is insured. I think we need to go through that spreadsheet to make sure that we've captured everything, and also the values that we've got on some of that stuff is more realistic, especially given the cost of replacing this particular bore and pump.
Councillor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm just wondering, in the current climate, what's the availability of being successful in getting somebody to do that job?
Yeah, look, that is a good question. There are only 4 companies in the state who are capable of drilling down to 230 metres and undertaking that type of work. They're all aware. My staff have spoken to several of those companies, are all aware that this thing's coming up. Obviously, given the value of it, we've advised that we have to go out to a public tender. So yeah, look, I suppose it depends what comes in when we test the marketplace, how much, and obviously we'll put some timelines in our specification. So I suppose we'll be at the mercy of the marketplace and availability of contractors when we go out and test the market.
Any other questions, councillors? Okay, item 5.2.3, Richardson Road Waste Facility Progress Report. Councillor Campbell, question?
I do, thank you, Mr. President. And I've got my responses already, but the other councillors may be interested. The report indicates a possible reduction in hours or days of operation to reduce the costs. What reductions are being considered, and is there any concerns that this could increase the level of illegal dumping? What is the current timeline for the closure of Richardson Road landfill? And should the alternate site be approved by council, is there a synchronised timeline for the establishment of the new transfer station and the closure of the current Richardson Road landfill?
Sounds like a parliamentary question through the Chair. Look, basically, we're monitoring the hours of operation. Currently, it's a 7-day-a-week, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. So we are monitoring the hours because we're finding that midweek it's very, very quiet. And obviously, we may look at either 2 half days or having it closed 1 day. But obviously, we need to sort of do our due diligence there, and once we've looked at that, investigated, we'll take something to council, because it's obviously a balance between costs and service provision, and obviously legal dumping and all that. So that's the answer to your first question. Second question, the timeline. Well, look, currently we're in a transition from putrescible waste to inert waste. So predominantly it's just inert waste at the moment, and the putrescible waste gets transferred elsewhere. Look, it'll always continue to accept some type of waste, the inert waste, as we develop, even as we develop it into a full-blown transfer station. There'll still be a small component of the inert waste that it will be able to take. And look, in terms of the timeline, obviously the alternative location has some very big advantages in terms of it's away from where the previous landfill was. It'd give us an unencumbered site to be able to develop that transfer station. And look, once we get that agreement, we'll go away and progress that particular option, and then report back to council on an implementation timeline.
Councillor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. President. One of my questions has already been answered by other questions. So I'm just wondering, with trying to divert landfill and concentrating on the recycling, are we going to see a similar sea container unit like the yellow one at Stanley Road in the new proposed development at Richardson Road? And also, ratepayers, will they be able to access compost and mulch from there?
Yeah, look, that's, in terms of the first question, we are looking at what type of transfer station we'll have, whether it's like bins or whether it's you go off a face and then there's a loader that actually then loads into receptacles that are then transported. So we haven't quite determined the actual nature of that, how that transfer station's going to look. We're looking at examples. We found a good one in the East Coast that might work for us. And in terms of, sorry, what was the second question again, Councillor?
Well, with me saying with the sea container at Stanley Road, that's smaller items for recycling, not bulk items. And so whether they're going to be handled there. And then the second one was, you're going to be able to access compost or purchase compost or mulch from them?
Yeah, look, at the moment, as you may be aware, we have got quite a few loads, piles of mulch there. They haven't really been, it's mainly just wood chipping and things like that, and there are some contaminants in them. It'd have to be treated to a better level before we make it available to the public. But that's something we'll be looking at. At the moment, the stuff that's there is probably suitable for areas that aren't high quality landscape and things like that.
Any other questions, councillors? Okay, item 5.3.1, use not listed, a fuel recharge and convenience stop. Councillor Campbell, a couple of questions.
Yes, thank you. I've got a couple here, so I'll just go through them one at a time. Could staff provide a comment regarding the traffic management plan, particularly the lack of acceleration lanes for both the north and the southbound traffic when exiting Stanley Road? And I acknowledge Mr Fitzgerald said they're focusing on southbound traffic, but you will still get northbound traffic wanting to turn into there and pull back out of Stanley Road. Yeah.
Through you, Mr Chair. Look, at present, just probably a bit of a point of clarification, a lot of the questions that have been sent through and are being discussed today are probably for the next report, should this actually get accepted as being a use not listed. We're going into the technical assessment of the proposal, which is a little bit premature in the process, but look, Councillor, as Mr Fitzgerald said, at the moment the consultants and main roads are on a similar page with regard to acceleration lanes and the queuing distances within that intersection in the median strip. So in their opinion, it warrants sort of going through the process, but that will be further looked at when it is formally referred out to main roads and they will undertake a more detailed assessment. One thing that has come out in terms of the appropriateness of the condition is actually the lighting of that intersection. At present it's not, and if this is supported going to a 24-hour facility, there would need to be the lighting. So just the simple installation of lighting may actually impact on some of the design configuration as well, but we don't know at this stage.
Okay, so without going... Oh, sorry.
Councillor Campbell, do you have another question?
So then my next question is, it says in the report that the proposal does not fall within the definition of a service station. Is that correct? And can staff explain why this development application may be consistent with the objectives and purposes of the Kemerton Industry Buffer Zone, when there's a number of the defined uses that are not permitted within the buffer zone? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Through Mr Chair, look, there's been a recent decision that actually was in regard to one of our applications for a service station that the Joint Development Assessment Panel concluded that because it didn't actually tick off every single component of that definition, for example, tyre repairs, mechanical repairs, greasing, so because it didn't tick off on every single item within that definition, the JDAP said, oh, it's use not listed. So we're stuck with that decision of the JDAP, rightly or wrongly, and that is why this particular application, because it doesn't address all those issues, is a use not listed. As far as the consistency with the objectives and purpose of the zoning, look, it is in an area, well, the purpose of that buffer does allow for lower scale or sort of low intensity uses that are compatible with surrounding development, and there is also that component in terms of the conservation of flora and fauna. So in the opinion of staff at the moment, it is considered appropriate that it is in a location that can be considered as being consistent with it. But again, there's still that assessment required to go forward. And it may determine through that advertising that flora fauna is of a quality or anything that actually could preclude it. So at this stage, we think we've got sufficient information to say that it could be, and therefore allowing it to go through the process for a more rigorous approval process. Does that answer?
Councillor Beach.
Thank you, Mr President. Mr Hall, page 29 of my agenda on the vegetation clearing, the first paragraph you mentioned about the vegetation being degraded or completely degraded, and that was from the 2015 report. Then this one paragraph, the next one is saying that it is good to very good. We're talking about the same area there, are we?
Through you, Mr Chair, if you give me 2 seconds to look at the paragraphs you're referring to.
Vegetation clearing.
Yes, yep.
The first paragraph says degraded or completely degraded, and the third paragraph says in good to very good condition. I want to know whether that is the same parcel of land we're talking about.
It is my understanding that yes, it is, and some of the reason that could be the change from 2015 to 2021, without reading the report in forensically, is the passage of time. It could have been at a quality like that. It hasn't actually had any other land uses in and around it, and it's probably regenerated itself. But again, I would like to probably clarify that with the environmental consultant and have a further, more detailed answer for you next week.
Yes, thank you. And a further question, in the second paragraph, under the same heading, vegetation clearing, how many orchids are scattered amongst the Baxter, Jarrett and Murray species?
You wouldn't be able to tell at this time of the year, Councillor, but offhand I wouldn't know at this stage.
It actually says orchards, as in...
Oh, okay. Well, they're definitely introduced, so they're exempt from the clearing permit, but if there are any orchids there instead, we'll have to have a look at those.
Thank you.
Councillor Dickinson, questions?
Sorry, thank you. I was just wondering if there were any other sites that had been identified along the bore for these sorts of facilities. And also I was wondering if there was going to be screening to separate the visual impact of the current use of the rest of that site, and also whether the Shire would have to fund any upgrades to Stanley Road and the interchange of Forest Highway.
Through you, Mr Chair, not that we're aware of in terms of any of our discussions with the Bumpy Outer Ring Road Alliance as to whether or not they've identified any further sites along there. I do know that as part of the referral process, the Shire of Dardanup went back and asked for a site on one of the intersections, I think around sort of Lilydale area, but I actually don't know the outcome of that discussion. As far as the screening is concerned, look, should the development be approved, that type of screening would be taken into account with any of the landscaping plans associated with that. As far as the upgrades to the intersection are concerned, no, the Shire wouldn't be funding any of that. That would be at the applicant's cost, and that would also be determined by Main Roads themselves. The majority of it.
Any other further questions, councillors? Okay. Item 5.3.2, proposed vegetation clearing and horticulture lot 6 and 8, Rig Road, Myler. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. President. My first question is, can the road reserve and fire breaks be considered as part of the buffer?
Through Mr. Chair, yes they can. The Department of Health guidelines do allow for both those fire breaks and roads to be included in that width.
Okay. Could staff provide an explanation on the 300 metre buffer versus the 40 metre buffer and the requirements in order to maintain this 40 metre buffer?
Okay, so Councillor, that 300 metres is a default position that's within the Department of Health's and the EPA's requirements. Now, if 300 metres is provided, their guidelines actually don't require any additional mitigation measures, being whether it be a fence, whether it be landscaping or anything. So you could just have that physical separation distance. It also provides for a 40 metre buffer on the proviso that 20 metres of that is actually vegetated to a standard that actually is cognizant of what that particular horticultural use is. So if it's a low crop, the vegetation planting can be low. If it's a higher crop, higher buffer. We've heard of a 4 metre sort of dust sort of plume. We will need to take that into account in considering what we at officer level determines to be appropriate buffer planting. And there's a condition requiring them to clarify that. As far as the maintenance and sort of, or the establishment and maintenance of it, the Department of Health requirements do actually need that buffer to be in and established prior to the commencement of use. And again, we've got a condition of that. We looked at putting timeframes in, we looked at survival rates, we looked at all sorts of different things that made it actually probably really onerous and complex because we haven't seen the details. So, but we will be obligated to comply with the Department of Health requirements to say it's in and it's functional.
Can the dust suppression be made a planning condition so that it strengthens that that requirement as opposed to just having it detailed in the operational plan?
Yes, it can.
Okay. And can staff comment on the consideration of extending the buffer in Lot 8 to incorporate the majority of that vegetated area to the north of Lot 8?
Yes, we can do, and it was sort of briefly touched on in the report, but the buffer that's obviously being provided is that not actually, I don't have the attachment, but I don't think it was the minimum of 40 metres, was it? It was
actually,
roughly the 40
attachment 2,
shows
if
it?
that could come up, that would be really good for us to have a look at, because that gives that new areas that they want to, the changes they've made, if that's possible.
Keep scrolling down. This one. Yes, thanks. So it appears to be looking at that. It is close to the 40 metres. You've got the road reserve as well. So that meets the minimum objective of the Department of Health. Councillors may recall that the original application came in and it actually sought the removal of all the tuart trees and these trees as well. The Shire has a very strong position and has a supported position from the Tribunal in regard to the protection of the tuarts that are federally listed. Since the last meeting, and I've met out on site with our environmental officer and their environmental officers and said, look, you are not going to get support from council, or an officer's recommendation is not going to be supportive if you're going to keep removing those tuarts. Unfortunately, the Jarramari woodland isn't protected. So our capacity to have that strong position and leverage of saying no is weakened. It's not to say that we don't actually like the fact that we're going to have vegetation clearing, and as a result we believe that this is a plan that could actually be supported, and it represents a balance between horticulture and protection of veg at its lowest form. If we were to increase the buffer, and the report actually says that that would be a desirable outcome, it increases that buffer to 190 metres. It retains the existing vegetation. The loss in area is going from about 12 down to about 8 hectares as far as arable land. That would be our desired, but we do believe that this particular layout actually is an appropriate compromise. But you do have the opportunity to increase the width of that buffer to also provide protection to that significant vegetation that's there.
Councillor Dickinson, did you have any questions?
No, I believe they've already been answered, thank you.
Councillor Crispin.
With the I just got it on Google Earth to have a little look-see. I see the road, the two little lakes where it says that vegetation will stay. They're kind of connected. So is there restrictions when it comes to like what they can spray in Lot 8? So I guess so it doesn't seep into the soil and then go into that little lake and actually cross into the other lake, contaminating it? Because I recall Dura was looking into that, weren't they? They said it was perfectly okay, or what was the...
So, look, the application of sprays is really outside the gambit of what council can control. That is definitely an Ag Department and Dura sort of requirement, but the width of the buffers that are recommended by Department of Health and EPA, and if they're planted and the buffers are working properly, that shouldn't occur in terms of that drift. As far as any sort of groundwater leachates, in theory the application rates are supposed to be that the shallow-rooted, very shallow-rooted horticulture picks up most of it, and so there shouldn't be any groundwater leakage, seepage. Those application rates, as I said, we don't get involved in that.
Councillor Brolin.
Thank you, Mr. President, through you. Given the water usage along that particular area, and talking about using water for dust suppression, is there adequate water resource for that to occur?
Again, the licensing provisions of water allocations are the responsibility of Dura. We know that this area is fully allocated, so whatever allocation they've got, they would actually need to, for dust suppression, they would actually need to engage with Dura to say that we would actually require X amount of litrage for dust suppression and the rest for application for water for the crops. But they would need to manage that within their current allocation. So, and I am assuming that because they've actually reduced their area of cropping, that they probably would have adequate water to do so. But they would need to manage how much is in the ground at any one time, depending on what their allocation is. For example, we have other growers that have a significant area of land, but they can only put under production certain parts of it because they're actually limited from what they can plant by their allocation. So, yes, no?
Councillor Lovett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've just got a question regarding there's one part of the agenda item on page 41. It refers to lot 6, and that the 100-metre buffer consists of a 10-metre bridle path, and then lot 8 consisting of 30 metres of the road reserve. With Rig Road already having a significant tourist venue on the corner of it, and bridle paths obviously having a tourism attraction, sprays, dust, the impact on tourism and the amenity, is that something that we can look at, that those buffers do not include the road reserve and the bridle path to extend that, because I have concerns about that one.
If EPA and Department of Health legislation provides for those type of activities to be included in the definition of a buffer, we would be mindful of the fact that departing from them to say, no, in this particular case we don't want, we would need to have some pretty good justification. I don't disagree with your justification, but it's something that at this stage, to be honest, we haven't really taken that into account, but I do understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. President. Mr. Hall, just confirming that in lot 6 there will be no chewit trees removed now?
Through Mr. Chair, the application we have includes no clearing of chewits, so that's as much as I've got.
Just add one question to that, Mr. Hall. Just that with regards to the chewits being a declared or an endangered, is that not in conflict with clause 67 FA of our endorsed local planning strategy, that it should be probably returned to its original state, which would be nil agricultural activity? Seems to be a bit of a conflict there.
You mixed up your questions there. You combined them into a couple there.
I'll let you roll with that one.
Okay, let's deal with the clause 67A. So as far as the local planning strategy says, is that really we shouldn't actually be, sorry, I'm going to go to the report. Basically, the vegetation protection should be given significant weight. Look, the retention of, it also gives ecological linkages, the retention of those chewits does achieve consistency with the intent of 67A. It would be fair to say that retention of all the vegetation in Lot 8 as well would achieve a greater level of consistency with it. So we do achieve consistency with it, with this proposal, more so if we were to keep the vegetation in Lot 8. As far as returning it back to horticulture, it's unlikely that we would be able to support or defend a condition of approval that says once you've finished cropping it, put it back to native veg. However, the clearing permit that is currently going through the system, which is yet to be determined, there is the ability for the clearing permits to actually have those type of conditions on there, and it's not unreasonable that some land uses actually do get rehab back to its former position or its former extent.
This one? Okay. Okay, is there any other further questions with 5.3.2? Okay, we'll just run through a roll call. Councillor Boylan, can you still hear us okay? Councillor Beach?
Yes, we hear you, Lord.
All good, thank you. You're just connecting to audio. Okay. Item 5.3.3, proposed standard scheme amendment number 129, additional use number 19, Harvey Springs Estate Tourism Precinct. Any questions, councillors? Okay. Item 5.3.4, transfer fines from reserve for sullage maintenance, Harvey Waste Facility. Confidential item, but is there any questions, councillors? Okay. Item 5.4.1, financial statement as at 28th of February 2022. Any questions, councillors? Okay, item 5.4.2, listing of accounts paid February 2022. Any questions? 5.4.3, business continuity plan 2022. Any questions, councillors? Item 5.4.4, video surveillance strategy 2022. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've got my glasses on. No, I've lost them. Is there a legal requirement for signage indicating surveillance cameras at both fixed and mobile fixed cameras? I asked this question because I was at the pool this morning and I noticed some cameras and I thought there's no signage to say that I'm being videoed.
So there is no legal requirement. However, within the this strategy and for any works that we would do, we would recommend having signage up because it has the added advantage that it also deters bad activity as well. But there's no requirement.
Is there a requirement for cameras to be installed by a contractor, or does Shire have qualified staff to undertake this? And if so, what's the anticipated costs for this installation and maintenance?
So there's no requirement for the cameras or CCTV system to be installed by a contractor or a licensed installer, but it is a specialised field, and so it's one that we would typically use a contractor or a licensed installer for. In relation to the cost, for a smaller job, for example, if we would put CCTV at the Leschenault Skate Park, that would be a $10,000 to $15,000 project, where the bigger scale project that we recently did at the Leschenault Leisure Centre, installing 40 cameras, that was $50,000. The system is not a monitored system, so we wouldn't actually be employing anyone to sit there watching the cameras. So the actual maintenance of it is something that would be internal, but the installation we would put out to typically out to a licensed installer.
Councillor Bron.
Thank you. Just a question, Mr. Winter. With the cameras we installed at the LLC, is that are these cameras accessed by police also? Can they be accessed from outside?
So currently none of the cameras or the video surveillance systems that the Shire operates can be viewed by the police or outside parties. If there's an incident, then they come to us and they request the footage, and we then provide that footage to them in a secure form. So it's not available to the public, and currently the police are not able to view those live footages, if you want.
Councillor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering how long the camera footage is kept for.
So the minimum duration that we keep the footage is for 30 days. If the footage is used or requested by the police, for example, then that would fall into a different category. We would retain that under our records keeping requirements.
Councillor Coleman, question? Oh, no. Okay. Councillor Crispin.
If they're not like watch all the time, there's like companies like Poltech which do monitoring systems. So basically, they have access to it all and they constantly are watching it. Obviously, they've got thousands of different companies they're doing it on, but gives the ability that if something does go haywire, they can spot it straight away. They start screen recording straight away. They've kind of got the ability, and I know they're very, very cheap and affordable, like averagely $100 a month kind of thing. Is that something we'd be looking at doing rather than putting the pressure on staff to learn how to rewind, screenshots, snap record and all that type of stuff if something does go wrong?
So our IT staff currently do that. They are skilled in doing that. So actually retrieving footage is not an issue internally at this stage. As far as, was there a first section to that question?
Yeah, I was just referring to like monitoring, like systems, so like with the Leisure Centre, a monitoring team which is constantly monitoring it.
Yeah.
That's all.
So there are a couple of local governments that have monitored systems. They are quite expensive doing it internally. The Community Safety and Crime Prevention Advisory Group has discussed this as part of its meeting, with having the system available to the police so that they can actually see live footage, and if they see something transpiring, then they're able to go and be there at that time. It's not something we currently have in place, but it's definitely highlighted for us to do some further investigation and then to take back to that group as far as locations and et cetera, et cetera. At this stage though, not looking at doing monitored, full-time monitored footage though.
Any other further questions, councillors?
I did have one other question, Mr. President, related to some wording in the actual strategy, and that was the word criminal is used in the strategy, and in the Community Safety and Crime Prevention Advisory Group, we actually highlighted that and made the change. We obviously haven't saved that change, and so if you're happy with that document, we would change that to, instead of just a legal act, to have a legal / antisocial. Otherwise it looks like it's something that technically the police would tell us isn't illegal.
Okay, is everyone happy with that change? Yep. Okay. Got to go ahead on that, Mr. Winter. So, all good. Okay, item 5.5.1, policy 3110, community gardens. Councillor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just was wondering, will guidelines be supplied to community gardens regarding the use and storage of chemicals on site?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you, Councillor. There will be a management plan, and that'll include the storage of chemicals under the safety component.
Any other questions, councillors? Okay, item 5.5.2, Shire of Harvey Grant Funding Program. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think this is a great report. My question is in regards to the facilities grant, and could an asset management plan be requested for all community-driven infrastructure initiatives, regardless of the amount requested, so that it doesn't matter whether it's a $2,000 infrastructure project or a $50,000, because it's something, it's a structure and it's infrastructure that we're going to have to take management of, maybe at some stage.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Chair. Absolutely, we can make that amendment based on that recommendation, and in conversation with the Director of Infrastructure before this meeting, it is the way that the Shire is moving towards adding a bit of rigour to its asset management, and this is the first way that we can do that. Thank you.
Councillor Dickinson.
Thank you. I was just wondering what happens when events are cancelled due to COVID and they've received community grants. What are groups required to show, and if they've spent some of the money, whether the residual money needs to be returned? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the residual money will need to be returned, but in the first place, the community development team will be doing everything it can to work with every community group to ensure that these events can go ahead wherever practical, because they are encouraging the social connection of community. Where the community group has progressed to a state and has spent some of those funds, they can just acquit those funds and we can move forward that way.
Any other further questions, councillors? Okay, item 5.5.3, policy 3111, graffiti management. Is there any questions, councillors? Item 5.5.4, ageing together, age-friendly strategy 2022 to 2027. Is there any questions?
Should have declared an interest, Mr. President.
Okay. Item 5.5.5, Bright Futures, a strategy for children and families 2022 to 2027. Any questions? Councillor Beach?
No, thank you. All good.
Okay. Item 6, notice of motion for following meeting. Okay. Councillor Lovett.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions regarding this that to get some background on it. The one I'd like, because I haven't received answers to these as yet, so I'll just pick out the main ones that I'd like to ask in the main council. What are the activity levels at reception for each site currently, just so that we gauge that growth? If we have those statistics available, I'm happy to get these in an email and then they can be shared across if that's easier. And the 2031 population looks to be 37,860. Have we got a percentage breakdown of the increase that's likely to be serviced by each centre? And also the Wolga Southwest Zone activity, the impact on travel cost and time for staff. So I'm happy for those to come out in an email.
Yeah, I suppose the first response in regards to the transaction counts at the reception counter, we do have that information, but that doesn't reflect the door count, which actually shows the over-the-counter transactions that we have for planning or building. So we're collating all of that information, which will be available. I'll pass on to Mr. Hall in regards to the population.
Through Mr. Chair, Councillor, look, yeah, the 2031 population projection of around about 38,000. The best way to probably answer this is to have a look at the figures now, so which we're looking at around about 28,000 now. So the current census figures shows that within Harvey itself, just the Harvey town site, you get about 2,700 people, which is roughly 10% of that total population. When you include all the other outlying towns of Binningup, Brunswick, Wokelup, Milup, you combine all those figures, you're up around about 6,000 people. So if you look at Harvey in isolation, it's about 10%. If you look at Harvey and those towns that are possibly more likely to interact with the Harvey town site more so than Australind, you're looking around about 20%. So if you extrapolate that out to 2030, which is an extra 10,000, that current split is about 2080. We know that Australind is going to develop a lot faster and it has the capacity to do so. So the trend is probably likely to be more 15%, 85%. I don't know if we'd get sort of a 90-10 sort of split, but there is that significant difference between the two.
And just your query in regards to travel costs, is that in regards to staff movements between office locations or more from where they travel from?
No, actually, because we're part of Southwest Zone, the impact, if the bulk of if this is the main admin area here, just having the travel distances when staff go to meetings in other shires and things like that within the Southwest Zone.
Yeah.
So more the actual work-related travel, nothing to do with where staff are based or between office, but actually engaging with other members of the Southwest Zone.
Yeah, I must admit that we haven't got that information. When we developed the operational plan report, we were specifically looking at travel between the two office locations and where staff were located. So yeah, we don't have that information. Sorry.
Councillor Bromham.
With staff movement, in relation to that, have we looked at it from an occupational health and safety aspect as well, given that time on the road is probably the most dangerous location for people to be?
Not in relation to locations of administration facilities. Obviously, through our OSH programs, we're cognisant of fatigue, but in regards to individual staff members of where they may be located and what that may do to travel times, no, we haven't.
Any other further questions? Okay. Item 7, matters behind closed doors, is nil. So item 8, declare the meeting closed at 5:17 and thank everyone for their attendance and have a great evening.